The autumn rain pelted against the cracked window of the small apartment as 22-year-old Rebecca Martinez bounced her 6-month-old son Diego gently in her arms. The baby's soft whimpers echoed through the sparse living room, where a single couch sat facing a small television that hadn't worked in months. Rebecca hummed a lullaby her grandmother used to sing, her voice trembling slightly as she calculated the remaining bills scattered across the coffee table. 3 months had passed since Marcus, Diego's father, had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only empty promises and unpaid rent notices. Rebecca's part-time job at the local diner barely covered the basics, and each day felt like a precarious balancing act between hope and desperation. Yet as she looked down at Diego's innocent face, his dark eyes reflecting the dim light from the single working lamp, she found strength she never knew existed. "We're going to be okay, mi amor," she whispered, kissing his forehead. "Mama will figure something out." The next morning brought crisp October air and the familiar weight of worry as Rebecca prepared for another day of job hunting. With Diego secured in his worn but clean stroller, she ventured into downtown Riverside, a mid-sized city where opportunity seemed as elusive as the morning mist. Her destination was the financial district, where she'd heard several businesses were hiring administrative assistants. As she navigated the bustling sidewalks, Rebecca couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between her faded jeans and second-hand sweater and the polished professionals hurrying past in their tailored suits. She pulled Diego's blanket tighter around him, shielding him from both the cool breeze and the judgmental stares that seemed to follow young mothers pushing strollers through business districts. The imposing glass facade of Hartwell & Associates investment firm loomed before her as she approached the building's entrance. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see elegantly dressed receptionists and men in expensive suits, discussing deals that probably involved more money than she'd see in a lifetime. Taking a deep breath, Rebecca smoothed her hair and prepared to enter when a heart-wrenching sound stopped her in her tracks. Crying. Not the typical fussing of an overtired child, but the raw, desperate sobs of someone in genuine distress. Rebecca turned to see a boy, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, sitting alone on a bench near the building's entrance. His school uniform was pristine, navy blazer, pressed khaki pants, and polished shoes that probably cost more than Rebecca's monthly grocery budget, but his face was streaked with tears. Diego began to stir in his stroller, making soft, cooing sounds as if sensing the other child's distress. Rebecca glanced at the building entrance, knowing that every minute she delayed could mean missing an opportunity for employment, but the sight of the crying boy pulled at something deep within her maternal instincts. "Hey there," she said gently, approaching the bench with Diego's stroller. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" The boy looked up, his green eyes red-rimmed and filled with a sadness that seemed far too mature for his young face. He wiped his nose with the back of his hand, trying to compose himself in a way that suggested he'd been taught that crying wasn't acceptable. "I'm fine," he mumbled, but his voice cracked with emotion. Rebecca knelt beside the stroller, bringing herself to the boy's eye level. "It's okay to not be fine sometimes. What's your name?" "Timothy," he whispered, glancing nervously at the building behind them. "Timothy Hartwell." The surname registered immediately. This was no ordinary child. The Hartwell family name was synonymous with wealth and influence in Riverside, their investment firm one of the most prestigious in the region. Yet here sat this little boy, alone and crying, as if he carried the weight of the world on his small shoulders. "That's a strong name," Rebecca said with a warm smile. "I'm Rebecca, and this little guy is Diego. He's 6 months old and thinks everything is fascinating." As if on cue, Diego gurgled happily, reaching his tiny hand toward Timothy. Despite his tears, Timothy's expression softened slightly as he looked at the baby. "He's really small." "He is, but he's tough. We both are." Rebecca sat on the edge of the bench, maintaining a respectful distance while making it clear she wasn't going anywhere. "Do you want to tell me what's making you so sad? Sometimes talking helps." Timothy hesitated, clearly torn between the need to confide in someone and what appeared to be years of conditioning to keep family matters private. "My mom, she's been gone for 2 weeks now. Dad says she's on a business trip, but I heard the housekeeper talking to the cook. She said Mom left because she couldn't handle our family anymore." Rebecca's heart clenched. Here was a child who had everything money could buy, yet he was experiencing the same abandonment she'd felt when Marcus left. The circumstances were different, but the pain in Timothy's eyes was achingly familiar. "I'm so sorry, Timothy. That must be really scary and confusing." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small packet of tissues, offering them to him. "You know what, though? Sometimes when grown-ups leave, it has nothing to do with the kids they're leaving behind. Sometimes they're dealing with their own problems that are too big for them to handle." Timothy took the tissues gratefully. "But what if she never comes back? What if I did something wrong?" "Oh, honey." Rebecca's voice was thick with emotion. "I can tell just by looking at you that you're a good kid. Whatever your mom is going through, it's not your fault. And even if she doesn't come back, you're going to be okay. Do you know how I know that?" Timothy shook his head, his attention completely focused on Rebecca's words. "Because you have something really special inside you. You have the ability to care about others, to feel things deeply. That's going to make you strong, even when things get hard." From somewhere high above them, behind the tinted windows of the Hartwell building, a figure stood watching the scene unfold below, his expression unreadable as he observed his son finding comfort in the words of a stranger with a baby stroller. 3 floors above the street scene, Jonathan Hartwell stood at his corner office window, his phone pressed to his ear as he half listened to a client discussing portfolio adjustments. His attention, however, was completely fixed on the young woman sitting beside his son on the bench below. He'd been searching for Timothy for the past 20 minutes after receiving a call from the boy's private school reporting his absence. "Mr. Hartwell, are you still there?" The client's voice crackled through the phone. "I'll have to call you back," Jonathan said abruptly, ending the call without waiting for a response. He watched as the woman, he could see she was young, probably in her early 20s, handed Timothy tissues and spoke to him with a gentleness that made something in Jonathan's chest tighten uncomfortably. For the past 2 weeks, since Catherine had packed her designer luggage and left with nothing more than a note saying she needed space to find herself, Jonathan had struggled to connect with his son. Every attempt at conversation ended in awkward silences or Timothy retreating to his room. The boy had stopped eating properly, his grades were slipping, and the expensive child psychologist Jonathan had hired seemed to be making little progress. Yet here was this stranger, and Timothy was actually talking to her. Jonathan loosened his tie and headed for the elevator, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble floor of the lobby as he approached the building's entrance. Through the glass doors, he could see that the conversation was continuing, and remarkably, Timothy was no longer crying. "You know what helps me when I'm feeling really sad?" Rebecca was saying as Jonathan stepped outside, positioning himself where he could hear but remain unnoticed. "I think about all the people who need help, and I try to do something kind for them. It reminds me that even when my world feels upside down, I can still make someone else's day a little brighter." Timothy wiped his nose and looked at Diego, who was making happy, babbling sounds from his stroller. "Like how you stopped to talk to me." "Exactly. And look how talking to you has made my day better too. Diego and I were feeling pretty nervous about going into that big building, but meeting you reminded us that there are good people everywhere, even in scary places." Jonathan frowned. Why would she be nervous about entering his building? He studied her more carefully, taking in her worn but clean clothing, the second-hand stroller, and the way she held herself with dignity despite clearly limited means. She was beautiful in an understated way, with long dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and warm brown eyes that seemed to radiate compassion. "Are you looking for a job?" Timothy asked, displaying the kind of perceptiveness that had always impressed Jonathan, even as it sometimes unnerved him. Rebecca nodded. "I am. Diego and we're on our own now, and I need to find work so I can take good care of him." "My dad owns this building," Timothy said quietly. "Well, his company does. Maybe he could help you." Jonathan's breath caught. In all the months since Catherine had begun pulling away from their family, and especially in the weeks since she'd left, Timothy had barely mentioned him to anyone. Yet here he was, suggesting his father as a solution to this young woman's problems. "That's very sweet of you to think of that," Rebecca said, "but I'm sure your dad is a very busy man. Besides, I don't have much experience with the kind of work they probably do in there. I've been working at Tony's Diner downtown, but they had to cut my hours because business has been slow." Diego began to fuss, and Rebecca immediately stood to rock the stroller gently. Jonathan watched, mesmerized by the natural ease with which she soothed the baby. Catherine had never been comfortable with Timothy as an infant, always calling for the nanny at the first sign of crying or discomfort. "My mom used to sing to me when I was upset," Timothy said wistfully, before she got too busy with her charity events and book club meetings. Rebecca's expression grew thoughtful. "Would you like me to sing something to Diego? Sometimes babies like it when different people sing to them, and maybe it would remind you of some happy times with your mum." Timothy nodded eagerly, scooting closer to the stroller. Rebecca began to hum a soft melody, then quietly sang what Jonathan recognized as a Spanish lullaby. Her voice was untrained but sweet, and the love in her tone was unmistakable. Diego's fussing ceased immediately, his eyes wide and alert as he listened. "That was beautiful," Timothy said when she finished. "What does it mean?" "It's about a little bird who gets lost, but finds his way home because he follows the sound of love," Rebecca explained. "My grandmother used to tell me that love is like a lighthouse. It always guides us back to where we belong." Jonathan felt his throat constrict. When was the last time anyone in his household had spoken about love so openly, so naturally? His world was built on acquisitions and mergers, profit margins and market analyses. Emotions were complications to be managed by hired professionals, therapists, nannies, tutors. "Rebecca," Timothy said suddenly, "do you think my mom will come back?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jonathan found himself holding his breath, wondering how this stranger would handle such a loaded inquiry from his son. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing her words carefully. "Timothy, I can't know what your mom is going to do, but I can tell you this. Whether she comes back or not doesn't change how special you are. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt the people they love, not because they want to hurt them, but because they're lost themselves." She knelt down again, meeting Timothy's eyes directly. "What I do know is that you have so much love inside you. I can see it in how you worry about your mom, in how gentle you are with Diego, in how you wanted to help me find a job even though you just met me. That kind of heart is going to carry you through anything life brings your way." Timothy threw his arms around Rebecca in a spontaneous hug that made Jonathan's eyes sting with unexpected emotion. His son, who had barely tolerated physical affection from anyone in weeks, was embracing this young woman as if she were a lifeline. Over Timothy's shoulder, Rebecca's eyes suddenly met Jonathan's through the glass doors of the building. For a moment, neither moved, caught in a gaze that seemed to stretch longer than it should have. Then Rebecca gently pulled back from Timothy's embrace, her cheeks coloring slightly. "I think," she said softly, "your dad might be looking for you." Timothy spun around to see his father approaching, and Rebecca watched as the boy's entire demeanor shifted. The open, vulnerable child who had been sharing his deepest fears just moments before seemed to fold in on himself, his shoulders hunching as he prepared for what appeared to be an inevitable confrontation. Jonathan Hartwell was even more imposing up close than he had appeared through the building's windows. Tall and broad-shouldered, with prematurely silver hair that somehow made him look distinguished rather than old, he carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from years of making decisions that affected millions of dollars. His charcoal grey suit was impeccably tailored, and his dark eyes held an intensity that made Rebecca instinctively step closer to Diego's stroller. "Timothy," Jonathan said, his voice carefully controlled, "the school called. You missed your morning classes." "I'm sorry, Dad," Timothy mumbled, staring at his shoes. The transformation was heartbreaking to witness. Gone was the boy who had laughed at Diego's babbling and hugged Rebecca with such genuine affection. Rebecca felt a surge of protective instinct, not just for Timothy, but for the fragile connection they had built. "Mr. Hartwell," she said, stepping forward slightly. "Timothy was upset, and we were just—" "I know who you are," Jonathan interrupted, though not unkindly. "I saw you from my office window." He paused, studying her face with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're looking for work." It wasn't a question, and Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks. Of course he'd overheard their conversation. "Yes, sir. I have my resume with me, though I'm not sure it's suitable for your type of business." Jonathan glanced down at Timothy, who was still avoiding eye contact. "Timothy, wait for me in the lobby. I need to speak with Ms. Martinez." "Rebecca Martinez. Ms. Martinez, 5 minutes. Then we'll go home and discuss why you decided to skip school." Timothy looked up at Rebecca with panic in his eyes. "But what about—" "Go ahead, sweetheart. Rebecca said gently. It's okay. After Timothy reluctantly disappeared through the glass doors, Jonathan turned his full attention to Rebecca. Up close, she could see fine lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights, and she realized that despite his composed exterior, Timothy's father was struggling just as much as his son. How long were you talking with him? Jonathan asked. Maybe 20 minutes, Rebecca replied honestly. I was about to come inside when I heard him crying. I couldn't just walk past. 20 minutes, Jonathan repeated, almost to himself. Do you know that Timothy hasn't spoken to me for more than 20 minutes total in the past 2 weeks? The admission surprised Rebecca with its vulnerability. This powerful man, who probably commanded boardrooms full of executives, was confessing his failure to connect with his own child to a complete stranger. He's scared, Rebecca said softly, and he thinks he's responsible for his mother leaving. Jonathan's jaw tightened. What did he tell you? Just that she's been gone for 2 weeks and he overheard the staff talking. Rebecca shifted Diego to her other hip as the baby began to wake from his nap. Mr. Hartwell, Timothy is a remarkable boy. He's sensitive and caring, and he's trying so hard to be strong. But he needs to know that it's okay to not be strong all the time. You think I don't know my own son? There was no anger in Jonathan's voice, only a weary frustration that Rebecca recognized all too well. I think you love him very much, she said carefully. But sometimes when we're hurting, it's hard to see past our own pain to help someone else with theirs. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, watching through the glass as Timothy sat rigidly on a leather chair in the lobby, his small hands folded precisely in his lap. He used to talk to me, he finally said, before Catherine started pulling away, before everything became about her needs and her unhappiness. Timothy and I would have breakfast together every morning, and he'd tell me about his dreams, his friends at school, the books he was reading. What changed? Rebecca asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. I got busy trying to fix a marriage that was already broken, Jonathan admitted. I thought if I could just make enough money, buy the right house, plan the perfect vacations, Catherine would be happy again, and Timothy... I guess I assumed he was resilient enough to weather the storm while I focused on damage control. Diego began to fuss, and Rebecca automatically began the gentle swaying motion that always calmed him. Children are resilient, she said, but they're not invincible, and they can't heal from abandonment by being abandoned again, even if it's unintentional. The words hit their mark. Jonathan's composure cracked slightly, and Rebecca saw the guilt and regret he'd been carrying. I don't know how to reach him anymore. Everything I say comes out wrong. When I try to comfort him, he pulls away. When I try to give him space, he seems to disappear even further. He just needs to know he matters more than business meetings and profit margins, Rebecca said, then immediately worried she'd overstepped. I'm sorry, that was presumptuous of me. No, Jonathan said quietly. It wasn't. It was accurate. He looked at her with something approaching wonder. How did you do it? How did you get him to open up in 20 minutes when I can't get him to look me in the eye? Rebecca considered the question seriously. I think it's because I wasn't trying to fix anything. I just listened to him and let him feel what he was feeling without trying to make it better or different. Sometimes people just need someone to witness their pain before they can start healing from it. And you have experience with that kind of pain, Jonathan observed, his gaze dropping to Diego. Yes, Rebecca said simply. Diego's father left when things got difficult. I know what it feels like to be abandoned, and I know what it's like to worry that somehow you caused it. Jonathan studied her with new interest. Here was a young woman who had every reason to be bitter, yet she had stopped to comfort his son with a generosity of spirit that humbled him. The job you're looking for, he said suddenly. What kind of work are you hoping to find? Honestly? Anything that pays enough for me to support Diego and myself. I have some office experience. I'm good with people, and I learn quickly. She hesitated, then added, I know this probably isn't the right place for someone like me, but Timothy mentioned you might... that maybe... Timothy suggested I hire you. Jonathan's eyebrows rose. Not exactly hire, just help, maybe. But I don't expect... What if I told you I had a position that might be perfect for you? Jonathan interrupted. Something that would use your natural abilities and solve a problem I've been struggling with for months. Rebecca's heart began to race. What kind of position? Jonathan glanced through the glass at Timothy, who was now slumped in the chair looking utterly defeated. When he turned back to Rebecca, There was a determination in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Timothy needs someone who understands what he's going through, someone who can help him navigate this difficult time while I figure out how to be the father he needs. He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. I'd like to offer you a position as Timothy's companion, not a nanny. He's too old for that and too proud to accept it. But someone who could be there when he gets home from school, help with homework, maybe take him to activities, someone who could be a friend when he needs one. Rebecca stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Are you serious? The salary would be substantial, enough for you to find a proper apartment, maybe even save for Diego's future. You'd have health insurance and we could arrange childcare for Diego or allow you to bring him with you when appropriate. Jonathan's voice grew more confident as he spoke, as if the idea was solidifying in his mind. What I saw here today, the way you connected with Timothy, that's not something I can hire through an agency. That's genuine compassion, and it's exactly what my son needs right now. But even as hope flared in Rebecca's chest, doubt crept in alongside it. There had to be a catch. Men like Jonathan Hartwell didn't just offer life-changing opportunities to strangers they'd met on the street. Mr. Hartwell, she said slowly, this is incredibly generous, but I have to ask, why? Why would you trust someone you just met with something so important? Jonathan's answer would change everything, though Rebecca had no way of knowing that in the moment when he opened his mouth to speak. Jonathan's expression grew serious as he considered Rebecca's question. The autumn wind picked up around them, rustling the leaves that had begun to fall from the oak trees lining the sidewalk. He glanced once more at Timothy through the glass doors, then back at Rebecca, and what he said next surprised them both. Because in 20 minutes, you gave my son something I haven't been able to give him in 2 weeks. Hope. His voice carried a weight of emotion that made Rebecca's breath catch. But more than that, you didn't do it because you wanted something from him or from me. You did it because you saw a child in pain, and your instinct was to help. That kind of character can't be taught or bought. Rebecca felt tears prick at her eyes. Mr. Hartwell, there's something else, Jonathan continued, his tone becoming more businesslike, as if he needed to retreat to familiar ground. I've been conducting interviews for months, trying to find the right person to help Timothy through this transition. Child psychologists, educational consultants, experienced nannies with impeccable references. But every single one of them saw Timothy as a problem to be solved, rather than a child to be understood. He paused, watching as a couple of his employees entered the building, nodding respectfully as they passed. When I watched you with him just now, I saw something I haven't seen in months. My son being himself, not the perfectly behaved little gentleman Catherine trained him to be, not the sullen, withdrawn child he's become since she left. Just Timothy. Diego began to whimper softly, and Rebecca automatically adjusted him in her arms, her movements so natural and practiced that Jonathan found himself envying her ease with parenthood. His own relationship with Timothy had always felt more formal, more cautious, as if he were afraid of making the wrong move. The truth is, Jonathan said quietly, I need this job as much as you do, maybe more. The admission hung between them, honest and raw. Rebecca studied his face, seeing past the expensive suit and commanding presence to the exhausted father beneath. She thought of her own struggles, of the nights she'd lain awake wondering how she would provide for Diego, and realized that wealth didn't immunize anyone from the fundamental challenges of parenthood. What exactly would you need me to do? She asked, her practical nature asserting itself even as her heart raced with possibility. Be there when Timothy gets home from school. Help him with homework. Take him to his violin lessons and soccer practice. Most importantly, just be someone he can talk to. Jonathan's voice grew softer. Someone who won't judge him for being sad or scared or angry about what's happened to his family. And Diego? We have a full-time housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who raised 4 children of her own. She's been asking for something meaningful to do since Timothy became too old to need much supervision. I think she'd love to help care for Diego when you're focused on Timothy. Rebecca's mind raced through the implications. A steady job with good pay, health insurance, a safe environment for Diego. It seemed too good to be true, and yet the sincerity in Jonathan's eyes made her want to believe it was real. There's one more thing, Jonathan said, and Rebecca's heart sank, waiting for the catch she'd been expecting. I travel frequently for business. sometimes for several days at a time. Timothy would need someone who could stay overnight when I'm away, someone he trusts enough to feel secure with. Instead of a burden, this felt like an even greater gift. Rebecca nodded slowly. I could do that. The salary would be $60,000 a year, plus health benefits and a housing allowance, Jonathan said matter-of-factly. You'd have weekends off unless I'm traveling, and 4 weeks of paid vacation. Rebecca nearly gasped. The amount was more than double what she'd hoped to earn, enough to change everything for her and Diego. But more than the money, it was the chance to make a real difference in Timothy's life that drew her. I accept, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Just like that? Just like that. Rebecca shifted Diego to her hip and extended her free hand. When do I start? How about right now? Jonathan shook her hand, his grip firm and warm. Timothy's missing school anyway, and you could come home with us, meet Mrs. Chen, see the house. We could call it a trial run. As they walked toward the building entrance, Rebecca caught sight of their reflection in the glass doors. A young woman with a baby, walking beside a powerful businessman, about to enter a world she'd never imagined being part of. The surreal nature of the moment made her dizzy. Timothy looked up as they approached, his eyes widening when he saw Rebecca and Diego with his father. Are you coming with us? He asked, hope creeping into his voice. Rebecca is going to be working with our family, Jonathan explained, his tone gentler than it had been earlier. She's going to help out after school and spend time with you when I have to travel. Timothy's face transformed, cycling through surprise, confusion, and finally cautious joy. Really? You mean Rebecca and Diego are going to come to our house? If that's okay with you, Rebecca said, crouching down to his level again, I'd love to see your room, and maybe you could show Diego some of your toys. He's still too little to play with them, but he loves looking at colorful things. I have lots of books too, Timothy said eagerly. Maybe I could read to him sometime. I think he'd love that, Rebecca replied, and was rewarded with the first genuine smile she'd seen from the boy. As they rode in Jonathan's luxury car toward the Hartwell estate, Rebecca gazed out the window at the changing neighborhoods, each one progressively more affluent than the last. Diego slept peacefully in the car seat Jonathan had insisted on installing, while Timothy chattered excitedly about his room, his books, and the treehouse in their backyard. Rebecca, Timothy said suddenly, his voice growing serious, do you think this means things might get better now? Rebecca caught Jonathan's eyes in the rearview mirror, seeing her own hope reflected there. I think it means we're going to work together to make things as good as they can be, she said carefully. All of us. The Hartwell estate took Rebecca's breath away. A sprawling colonial mansion set on perfectly manicured grounds, with towering windows that caught the afternoon sunlight and a circular driveway that could accommodate a dozen cars. But it was Timothy's excited tugging on her hand as he led her toward the front door that made the house feel welcoming rather than intimidating. Mrs. Chen, a small energetic woman in her 50s, greeted them at the door with obvious curiosity about the young woman carrying a baby into her domain. But when Jonathan explained the situation, her face lit up with genuine pleasure. Oh, a baby, she exclaimed, immediately reaching for Diego with the practiced ease of an experienced grandmother. He's beautiful. And you, young lady, you're an angel sent to help our Timothy. As Rebecca watched Mrs. Chen coo over Diego, while Timothy proudly showed them around the house, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a sense of belonging. This wasn't just a job. It was a chance to be part of something larger than herself, to help heal a broken family while building security for her own. That evening, as she tucked Timothy into bed in his room filled with books and model airplanes, he looked up at her with serious eyes. Rebecca, are you going to stay, even when things get hard? The question pierced her heart, revealing just how deeply the abandonment had affected him. Timothy, I promise you this. As long as you and your dad want me here, I'm not going anywhere. Diego and I were not the kind of people who give up on the people we care about. 3 months later, as Rebecca watched Timothy confidently present his science project to his class, while Diego clapped enthusiastically from his stroller, she marveled at how completely their lives had transformed. Timothy had blossomed under consistent attention and unconditional acceptance, his grades improving dramatically as his confidence returned. Jonathan, too, had changed. He'd begun coming home earlier, joining them for dinner, and actually listening when Timothy shared his day's adventures. The distance between father and son had gradually closed as they both learned to navigate their new normal. The biggest surprise had been Catherine's return 2 weeks earlier. She'd walked into the house expecting to find everything exactly as she'd left it, only to discover Timothy laughing at the kitchen table while Rebecca helped him with homework, and Diego babbled from his high chair nearby. The conversation that followed had been tense but necessary. Catherine had realized, seeing Timothy's obvious happiness and security, that her absence had been filled by someone who genuinely cared about her son's well-being rather than simply managing his schedule. "I can see he's happy," Catherine had admitted to Rebecca privately. "Happier than he was when I was here. That's hard to accept, but it's also a relief." Now, watching Timothy beam with pride as his classmates asked questions about his volcano model, Rebecca felt the deep satisfaction that came from knowing she'd found her true calling. She wasn't just earning a living, she was making a difference in the lives of people she'd grown to love as family. Jonathan appeared beside her, having slipped away from his office to attend Timothy's presentation. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion as he watched his son field questions with newfound confidence. "For what?" Rebecca asked, though she already knew the answer. "For seeing him when I couldn't, for giving him back his childhood, for giving me back my son." As Timothy caught sight of them and waved enthusiastically, Rebecca reflected on the chain of events that had brought them together. Sometimes, she thought, the best things in life happened when you stopped looking for them and simply opened your heart to helping others. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen. "Diego said Mama for the first time today. Can't wait to show you the video." Rebecca laughed, feeling tears of joy well up in her eyes. A year ago, she could never have imagined this life. Stable, secure, surrounded by people who had become her chosen family. But as she'd told Timothy that first day on the bench, love really was like a lighthouse, always guiding you home to where you belonged.